It's important not just to worry about things we've done, it's also important for any of us to worry about what we failed to do. What is an examination of conscience? It's a question that is very important to discern out before one makes a sacramental confession, that is, getting in line for the Sacrament of Reconciliation, the Sacrament of Penance. So this step, the examination of conscience, precedes a sacramental confession. And many people want to know what it is. So you ask, how do we make one? How do I put it together? And then how does it come out in the confession? Simply put, an examination of conscience is a short period of reflection that you as a penitent would make prior to making a sacramental confession. And here you're examining what your walk with the Lord has been since your last confession, and if you have committed any serious sins since that last confession. And so what you're obligated to confess in confession to the priest are your mortal sins. I mean, you can confess any sin you want, but you're obligated to confess at least your mortal sins. So many people make an examination of conscience, let's say kneeling in church before they get in line. Others are making it as they're standing in line. Others are making it in the car when they're driving over to the church or walking over to the church. When you make the examination of conscience, makes very little difference. But I would recommend that when you're making an examination of conscience, you should do it in a place and in a way that you can be recollected so that you can actually consider your state of soul before going into the confessional. So whatever you come up with and you are able to recall in your examination of conscience, usually is what you tell the priest in the confessional. It would be somewhat pointless to come up with all of these sins that you know you need to confess and then not confess them. In fact, if you deliberately omit the confession of mortal sins in the confession, it invalidates the confession. Even if the priest says the words of absolution, if you're purposely omitting those sins in the actual confession of sins during your reception of the sacrament, you're actually invalidating the graces of the sacrament. You can't receive the graces of the sacrament available to you otherwise. Before we continue, I'd like to invite you to collaborate with our mission here at St. Patrick's Seminary, where we're invested in the formation of future priests, which, as you know, is crucial to the evangelization of the world, the celebration of the sacraments, and the promotion of the church that Christ founded. If you'd like to make a contribution, please do so in the link below. And again, we thank you in advance for your collaboration with us in this all-important ministry. So the examination of conscience can be done in any number of ways. And I'll just name two, which are the basic ways that people like to make an examination of conscience. So in many parishes or many churches, oratories, they'll have a guide, literally a physical paper guide that hopefully you can avail yourself of and read through. Many of these guides typically will be broken down into the 10 Commandments. So the examination of conscience goes through the 10 Commandments, 1 through 10, and your job as a penitent is to kind of go through the questions that are relevant to each of the 10 Commandments and then say, yes, I did that. No, I didn't. And what you're really trying to come up with is, what have I done? Okay, that's a species. And then the number, the amount of times. Now, sometimes if I'm hearing a confession of someone who hasn't been to confession like in many years, and they can't really come up with a number, I'll ask them to say a little, a lot, not so much, or never. It's never been an issue. Something like that, okay? So if you're noticing here, one of the great things about the Sacrament of Penance is that God does not rely on our feeble memory in order to heal us and forgive us. Now, again, if you're deliberately omitting confessing a mortal sin, that's a problem, like I said earlier. But so long as you're doing the best you can in the moment, and sometimes people do have this qualm of conscience after they leave the confessional, they're driving home and they're like, oh my goodness, I forgot to confess X, Y, or Z. Well, as long as you didn't deliberately forget to confess that sin, then you're covered. You're healed, you're forgiven. So that's one way, 10 Commandments. That's the standard format. And by the way, if you go online and you just Google examination of conscience, Catholic 10 Commandments, there are literally dozens of choices available to you. And you can pick the one that seems to speak to you the best. The other way to think about doing your examination of conscience is to consider three categories. How have I sinned against God? How have I sinned against myself? And how have I sinned against others? That's even more basic than the 10 Commandments. But, you could feed that into the 10 Commandments as well. So take each of the commandments and do like a hybrid. And with each of those commandments, have I offended God, myself, or others in these particular acts or thoughts or attitudes that I've deliberately cultivated that have become sinful. Now, another way, and I would say that this is the type of examination of conscience prior to confession that can be really helpful, is not only to include the 10 Commandments, but also to consult the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 8. Because the Beatitudes present us with the blueprint of the Christian moral life. So these are the aspirations that we should be living up to. And one could, in an examination of conscience, arrive at the conclusion that one has failed to live up to these aspirations that the Beatitudes present us with. So it's important not just to worry about things we've done, but I would say it's also important for any of us to worry about what we've failed to do. These are what are called sins of omission. What we've done are called sins of commission. What we failed to do are sins of omission. But we should be concerned about both. As you probably have sensed in your own journey with the Lord, there are moments when we can gloss over or ignore graces that God is presenting to us, and we fail to act in a way that we know God is moving us to, but for some stubbornness or pride or whatever obstacle stands in our way are unable to reach. Here too, this can also be brought to light in the examination of conscience. And it's really a wonderful practice because it makes us much more aware of our state of soul, God's grace working in our lives. And it's a practice that many actually do every night before they retire to bed, to review the day that has been, and then to make one or two simple resolutions for the day to come. In that way, the examination of conscience isn't just a matter of perhaps accusing ourselves of things that make us feel guilty, but helps springboard us into positive action in a life of virtue. And those two things working together can really help us on our way to holiness. If you like this content and other content we provide here at St. Patrick's Seminary, as always, feel free to like, subscribe, and share. And as always, thanks and God bless.